Hi all, I think we will get started now and I'm sure people will join us as well. So welcome everybody this evening. I'm Aphra Shemza, and for those of you that don't know me, I'm a professional multimedia artist and I'm currently artist in residence at SPACER as well, which is an eco arts hub here in Ramsgate. I'm going to be doing the talk this evening and I'll be sharing slides and videos and images with you. And I have my lovely assistant Al, who's going to be monitoring the chat with us this evening, as it's a little bit difficult for me to do that at the same time. So Al will be there monitoring the chat and can answer any questions, or if you have any issues with sound, etc., she can do that for you. So tonight is really exciting because it marks the completion of my Ocean Rise project, which I've been working on really intensely for the last few months. And the project is where I upscaled my plastic recycling capabilities, and I'm going to share with you the practical methods I've been using to do that. I've been creating new artworks, I've been designing accessible workshop content, and I've been disseminating my new skills and knowledge with some peer events. And so I'm really delighted to share all of this journey with you. So before I launch into the talk this evening, I just wanted to point out that I don't consider myself, even though I've been on this journey for a little while now, a complete expert in the field of sustainable practice or in the field of sustainability. And just like many of you, I'm on my journey to be more mindful, and I'd like to encourage all of you to ask lots of questions and inquire from me about my practice. And I'm really just want to create a nice safe space for us all to have a discussion at the end as well. So I'll be presenting my work for the first sort of 40 minutes, and then there'll be about 20 minutes at the end for questions. So it would be great to take them. And you're welcome to write questions in the chat. And if they're relevant to something that's going on as I'm presenting, I can answer them live, and Al will just jump in and butt in. And then at the end, you can unmute yourself and ask me questions as well. So why are we talking about the subject this evening? So I'm sure that you don't need me to tell all of you that this is not a drill, that climate change is real and it is happening right now. We're already seeing really freak weather occurrences and the displacement of people across the globe. And we in the UK have a rather historic debt to settle here. We are the last generation of people, here we are all together, that could make a difference to climate change and global warming, and hopefully slow down the warming to prevent the extinction of our species. And COP26 was held last year, which was a big climate summit in Glasgow, and it saw world leaders come together to sign a climate deal agreement to try and prevent the world warming higher than 1.5 degrees. Unfortunately, I have recently been delving into the IPCC report, which is a rather chunky document, and it has become clear that the recent scientific research is that even with 1.5 degrees warming, this could still be quite catastrophic for our planet. However, maybe naively, I'm still incredibly optimistic about what's going to happen next. And I really believe that we as human beings are resilient, and that we have great knowledge and skills to do the work needed if our resources and our time is put into the right places. So I still feel very optimistic about that. And what does this have to do with art? Well, I think that art is a tool kind of for where I'm able to explore and raise questions about my human existence or the lives in society that I inhabit. And I feel like art is a really good place where we can discuss future possibilities, imagine and practice different ways of living or other ways of being in the world. And hopefully that these kind of areas will lead the way for other industries to follow. And the artist Oliver Eliasson here said, art is a practice through which vital aspects of society and life may be examined, challenged and renegotiated. And he, on the left there, you can see an image of his ice watch where he shipped in icebergs from the Antarctic to the South Bank, so that the public could actually see, feel and see the ice actually melting away in front of our eyes, to make that really tangible. And that was a really interesting project, I think. I also wanted to share with you this article by the writer Ben Okri, which was published in The Guardian last year. And here Ben Okri was calling for existential creativity. And I sort of feel like I'm having an existential crisis every day with this project. So Ben called for a new philosophy in the face of our extinction. And it's a really interesting article, so I'd recommend having a look at it. He writes that artists should pick up this mantle and try and awaken the public into the enormity of what is looming, and the fact that at the moment we can still do something about it. And I think, so in my own practice, I feel like I'm right at the forefront of all of these discourses, because I combine art and technology together and try and look for a sort of synthesis between these two forms. I'm really excited about the future. I'm really excited about progress and technology, but at the same time, I'm forced into this dialogue with our throwaway consumer culture, as are many of us. And I think this is where this kind of discourse and this dialogue starts to get meaty and interesting as a subject. So that's the kind of overview of what's going on in the world. Why am I interested in this? In my own art practice, I have a keen interest in modernism, my Islamic cultural heritage, creating art for everyone, and also I advocate for a more sustainable practice. And as an artist and activist, I find ambitious ways to fuse methodologies from the past with new innovations to imagine what the role of art could be in the future. I tend to combine abstraction with traditional sculpting techniques and technology to create my work. And as a sculptor, I'm actually using light a lot as one of my mediums. I create handmade and bespoke interactive circuits, and this creates artworks that respond to the viewer or the space around them. And I'm really interested in creating a new visual language for a contemporary audience that explores the impact and legacy of technology on our world. And I work in series, so you've seen many different series there in the video, and each series has a different aesthetic quality and a different theme. And I'm just going to take you through a couple of the series that I started creating pre-sustainable thinking, so that you can see my journey, because I think it's really interesting to get a sense of that. So in my composition series was the first series I started creating back in over a decade ago now. And this series was all about our connection to one another and to the cosmos. And I used two-way mirrored perspex and LED to create these infinite sculptures that responded to the viewer as well. So they had different sensors in, and they changed color depending on where people were in the space around them. And this was very much about connectivity and the universe and how we are all connected. I'm just going to give you a little one-liner for some of these series so that you can just get a glimpse of it if you don't know my practice already. So the totem series is all about nature and balance. So I am starting already, over 10 years ago, starting to think about different materials, working with wood, and thinking about how we all have this idea where we want to put our phones down and go off into nature, leave technology behind. And this was a kind of the beginnings of starting to imagine what it might be like if we could have these two things together and they could be in balance. In my Diffuser in Symphonica series, these were the first times that I started working with reclaimed materials. So in the Diffuser series, which are the works at the top, I've actually used these reclaimed light fixtures that you see in office buildings, and then combined that with light. And they also have a microphone inside that makes them sound reactive. So they respond to the viewer and to music and the space around them. So already I was kind of thinking about the type of materials I was using and trying to see if I can reclaim or reuse materials. But it wasn't until I was commissioned in 2017 to make two different light installations that I started making work that was more kind of political, that had more of a political idea to it. So Post Truth and Beauty, which is the immersive installation you can see on the left, was created in collaboration with the artist Tim Murray Brown. And this piece, it was interactive and it had an Xbox Kinect that mapped the viewer's head in the space. And there was an animation happening on the lights behind, and also a 3D soundscape on these speakers that were all around the viewer. And the idea of the piece was that as you moved your head around the space, you started hearing parts of a whole melody, but you never quite heard a whole piece of music altogether. And you also never saw an entire animation or an entire picture appear on the LEDs. And the idea that it was meant to be, we were talking about this idea of that us being in a post-truth era, in the wake of the Trump election and fake news and deep fakes and all that kind of idea. And so with the installation, we wanted to create this type of uncertainty where the viewer is never quite sure what the whole truth is. With Seconds Past, which is the piece on the right, I was commissioned by Save the Children to create a data visualization piece. And that was the first time I used data visualization. And in this artwork, I was visualizing every time a child under 5 died in the world and where their death could have been preventable. So we had some statistics for that. I think it was something like every 3 seconds a child dies and their death could have been preventable. And so we use that within the installation to convey that hard-hitting political message. And it really did get those ideas across to the public. And I thought that that was really interesting. And I started working in this way moving forwards. And that brings us up to about 2019, when my sustainable journey really started to take shape. And so I wanted to touch on this project before I talk about what I've been doing recently, so you can see the journey there. So back in 2019, I'd started to look at my personal life and change the way in which I was living to have a more sustainable lifestyle. And my partner and I were thinking about how we could be more zero waste. And as I was doing that, I realized that my art practice, I wasn't doing that in my art practice. I hadn't thought about how to be less wasteful. I hadn't thought about how I could be more sustainable. I also got concerned with how long my works are going to live, because they have technology in them. I was selling my work to clients, and we were all thinking about, how do we repair these works? How do they last? What's their legacy? And I didn't want to create artworks or items that would basically end up on the rubbish heap. So that became really important to me. I was really lucky enough to be funded by the Arts Council on a Developing Your Creative Practice grant. And I had a 3-month artist development program where I was artist in residence at Building Blocks. And I took my 2 core materials, wood and plastic, and learnt new skills that would benefit my practice for years to come, looking at how to work with reclaimed timber. And I started then recycling plastic waste in a sort of more DIY way. So in the wood workshop, I learned how to take reclaimed timber and plane and thickness it. And I was taught lots of skills by a master craftsman, Archie Hands, who gave me focused knowledge about how to work with hardwood. And in the wood workshop, I started then for the first time to make artworks that were about climate issues. So this artwork was created then, and it's called Current Climate. And this piece is a data visualization piece that displays in the lights under the logs every time a news headline in 4 different countries in the world mentions climate change or a freak weather occurrence. So we can see who's talking about climate change in the world and where they're talking about it and how often they are. And at the time, I was really surprised when I made that how little the artwork kind of went off. But now there's a lot more talk and discussion going on, and it's really interesting to see that in the news headlines. In the plastic workshop, I wanted to see if I could create a more sustainable practice with plastic in my work. And this workshop was born out of being inspired by a website that was called Precious Plastics. And they're a group of artists, designers, makers in the Netherlands who've released DIY open source machines which recycle plastic waste and allow you to turn them into different things for creative purposes. And I was really inspired. It's a lot of DIY, do it yourself by them. And there's a really big community online of people talking and sharing their knowledge and skills. And so I decided to do a bit of a lower cost way of doing things in this project and designed 2 different methods for recycling plastic waste. I decided to work with, there are many different types of plastic, and I decided to work with low density polyethylene, which is number 4 in those triangles that you get on the bottom of plastic containers and things like that, and high density polyethylene. And high density polyethylene is number 2. So high density polyethylene are things like milk bottles and food containers, and low density polyethylene are plastic bags, bubble wrap, anything that's a bit stretchy. And I decided to work with these plastics because they have low melting temperatures, so they become malleable at a low temperature. And they also don't release toxic fumes when you warm them up at the temperatures I was working at them with. And it's really important, if you are going to try this at home, that you make sure that you know what types of plastic you're using, because some plastics, obviously, if you heat them up, they're going to release really nasty fumes. So you need to make sure that you know what you're using. And I'm going to show you now 2 videos that explain the different DIY techniques I was using back in 2019. In the Ocean Rise project that I've been working on in the last few months, I've developed some new techniques and upscaled all this. So I'm really excited to share that with you next after I've shared you these. But these are a really great way and a really good entry point. You don't need to spend too much money to get yourself set up to do these. So I'm going to share these with you. So this is the first method, low density polyethylene.
With my plastics recycling, it's low density, so it's all the stuff that's kind of a bit stretchy and a bit flexible, basically. And the process is that I put bubble wrap and plastic bags on a baking tray and put it into the oven and melt it, and it will shrink in size. And then after it's shrunk in size, I mold it into a ball, and then I put that into a hydraulic press and compress that with lots of pressure and leave it there for about 20 minutes. And what I end up with is a beautifully compressed material that is nothing like bubble wrap or plastic bags or anything like that. It's a kind of totally new material in itself, really.
So that was method 1. I'm going to show you method 2 now, next, so you can see how I was working with HDP, so milk bottles and food containers.
So I'm cutting up milk bottles and HDPE and putting it into a NutriBullet, which then grinds it all up into a nice kind of powdery substance. I put it into a toasty maker, and I've got 2 metal plates and some spacers around the edge to get the depth of the plastic, and I'll pour that in there, close the lid of the toasty maker and clamp it shut for about 8 or 10 minutes. And then I take that material out afterwards, let it cool down and shape it with a bandsaw and just sand it off the edges.
And I love developing those techniques and making these new materials was so exciting for me, especially the method with the low density polyethylene, because it made these beautiful textures that were kind of like marble or something, and you never really, or paintings, you know, you never knew what they were going to come out like every time you press them out of the press. And I think with the low density polyethylene as well, we don't really recycle plastic bags or bubble wrap or things like that already. And so it was really a great step forward, I think, to start creating, imbuing this waste material with a new value and creating new artworks. So here you can see some of the designs that I created with those. These are compositions 1 to 4 made out of recycled plastic. And the colours there are made from the colours of plastic bags. So the one on the top left with the orange, that's Sainsbury's bags. you know, and the red and the blue in the bottom, they're parts of Tesco's Bag for Life. So you get a sense of really how this is being mixed in. The see-through parts are kind of see-through packaging or bubble wrap, and then I've kind of mixed in smaller amounts of colour to get those happening. And what was challenging about working like this? So it was quite challenging because I was trying to figure out how to actually process the plastic. So first off, I was collecting it, then I was cleaning it, then I was processing it and turning it into the sheet material. And then I had to make artworks from it. So of course, by the time I'd got to the part of making artworks, I hadn't quite thought out what those artworks were going to be like. And I think the process and the how it's all made, the videos, all of that, that's really part and parcel of the artworks themselves. So I learned a hell of a lot doing that project. It was really fantastic, and it was amazing to have the time and space funded by the Arts Council to actually play and experiment and start to get those techniques down. And it became really important for me to start sharing my work. So just as there was these budding, these other artists, these other designers, all talking to each other and chatting online, I wanted to share what I was doing as well. So I published and created a website called art-ology.co.uk, and that's where I published and shared some resources for how artists could be more mindful about the materials that they use to create their own work. And in the last year, I've also been published in the Artist Manual with an eco art section there, and in the UK Green Guide as well. So that's been really fantastic to be a part of that. And since that 2019 project, I've been starting to make more works about the climate crisis. So global warming is my latest art, one of my latest pieces created this year. And this artwork was inspired by the Show Your Stripes image, which you can see on the right there, which was created by Professor Ed Hawkins from the University of Reading. And the globe, it basically shows the Earth's global temperatures for the last 170 years there. And you can see how all the blues represent the lower temperatures. And then just only really in the last kind of 50 or so, 100 years, we've started getting these reds. The temperature of the Earth has really, really warmed up dramatically. And I wanted to highlight this and show it in a new kind of artwork. And here I've decided to also really highlight the physicality of technology, because I think a lot we kind of send our files to the cloud. We don't really have a grasp or an understanding of how much energy and how physical electricity is and technology is. So I've basically used all these kind of cables as a way to kind of excess cables, like way too much, as a way to show that all of this technology and all of these resources are being consumed when we're doing these things. So I also have created other artworks as well. So last year I was commissioned to create Hive Mind, which was a collaboration with students from the Backstage Academy, and this was shared at Lightwaves Festival in Manchester. And with this project, I actually briefed the students and asked them to create an artwork that highlighted the ecological crisis and brought people together. And they decided to use the Manchester bee, which is a kind of symbol of Manchester, as a symbol for community. And we created this hive structure that was interactive and changed depending on how many people were together in the space. This was meant to highlight that if we all come together, that we could all do something, make a change. So that was a really interesting project. And of course, the namesake of this new project, Ocean Rise, was a fantastic commission by Canary Wharf Arts and Events for Summer Lights Festival last year. And this really sparked all the ideas and the thoughts for what I was doing this year. So I'm just going to play you the video about this public sculpture. And actually, it's still in Canary Wharf. So if you are in London and you'd like to go and see it, you can do so. It's by the riverside. So I'll just play you that video now.
Ocean Rise is a mixed reality sculpture that highlights the rise in sea levels due to global warming. Built using sustainable materials, the shape of the artwork emulates a wave in the ocean and is accompanied by a bespoke soundscape featuring field recordings of waves crashing on the shore created by the artist Mowgli. These can be accessed via a QR code near the work. The work creates a connection between the physical and the digital, the city and the ocean, allowing the viewer a chance to contemplate their role in the current climate crisis and offering a moment of calm amidst the busyness of city life.
And I'd just like to thank Keith Watson for commissioning that. I think you're here on this call, so it was a real pleasure and honour making the artwork for the Summer Lights Festival last year. So, and the Ocean Rise project that I've been working on for the last few months was born out of that commission, because I needed to design a sculpture that was really quite large, and so I wasn't able to produce the plastic that I needed for that sculpture. I didn't have any kind of larger way of processing the plastic apart from making these small tiles at the time, and we were just coming out of the pandemic, so actually at the time I didn't have a studio either, and I wanted to find a way to upscale my plastic recycling capabilities. And so to do this, and also I think it's really important. So I did work with a great company last year called the Good Plastic Company, who provided me with a recycled plastic for that sculpture, and they were fantastic. But the materials that these companies produce, they're not really artworks in themselves, and I really wanted to make the recycled material an artwork. You know, I wanted it to be almost like a painting and to have that artistic touch rather than just to be a material that can be used for, you know, countertops or in bathrooms or things like that. And why am I so interested in plastic? What am I doing? Why am I bothering with this? So, and I started thinking about this a bit more recently, and I really want to try and find a solution for our plastic pollution problem. Obviously, it would be great if the governments around the world ruled plastic out, you know, banned it. But at the moment, that's not happening. And we just have this stuff piling up. In the UK, I've recently found out that we only recycle 10%, actually 10% of the plastic that is put into our recycling bins. And the rest of it is either burnt or ends up in the ocean, which was really shocking to me. And just to give you a few stats, so every year, 11 million tons of plastic enters the ocean, 11 million tons. And it costs global economies 13 billion a year to clean up this, to get rid of the plastic. And there's a lot of other, I've got tons of stats here, but just 89% of plastic litter found in the ocean are single-use items like plastic bags. So if I can save some of them and put them into artworks, that's great. I'm taking them out of this kind of destructive cycle. And also, of course, marine plastics. 800 marine and coastal species are affected by marine plastics, and every year more than 1 million seabirds and 100,000 mammals are killed by plastic debris. And I think that that's, you know, it's dreadful, isn't it? Absolutely terrible. So if I can take that plastic and put it into something that is going to last and be cherished and looked after, like an artwork is, I think that makes more sense than kind of letting it out into the world. So with this project, I've created a circular economy. So I save plastic from that cycle where it might be burned or dumped in other countries' waste, and I've disrupted that cycle. So I get local plastic from local areas, and I then process it and turn it into sheet material to make my artwork with. And you might remember those DIY techniques that I've shown you before. Well, I've been able to now upscale this. So I've been able to purchase 2 machines from the Precious Plastics family, the shredder, which allows me to process plastic on a much larger scale, and the sheet press, which allows me to press sheets that are about 46 by 46 centimeters large. And again, I'm using specific types of plastic. So I've been using HDPE and LDPE again, and this chart maybe gives you a bit of a sense. This is from Studio MBB, where I bought the sheet press from. The different kinds of plastic and whether they're safe to melt or not. So there's different ones. PET, for example, which is very difficult to process, unfortunately, are those plastic bottles. PVC releases toxic fumes. And I'm happy to share this with you guys if you're interested and want to learn a bit more about that. But I've gone for HDPE and LDPE again. And then in the workshops, I've added in polypropylene because that was a really interesting one to get started with. So I'm going to share with you again a couple of videos for my new recycling methods so you can see how I've been doing that.
HDPE is things like milk bottles and food containers. And so I take this material and put it into my shredder machine that shreds the plastic into these fine granules. I then measure out, weigh the plastic, and I found that 1.4 kg works really well for my 46 by 46 centimetre sheets. I then oil up my mould and put the plastic into the mould. And then I found that I really like working with the bags that come around fruit and onions and things like that because they're colourful and they provide this really lovely netting texture. So I place that on the top of the material. I then place the mould into the sheet press at 150 degrees and leave it in the machine for 20 minutes to melt the plastic into the sheet.
Those nets were a bit of a revelation because I'm kind of saving those, and they're really lovely bright colors and you're able to overlay them all together, and I really like how that looks. And I think it sort of adds in an element of this. You can kind of bring in fishing nets and things like that, so it adds in conceptually a bit of an interesting aesthetic, I think. And the second method was low density polyethylene, so using the sheet press again, and this is a building on those DIY techniques that I shared with you before.
LDPE is things like plastic bags and bubble wrap, all those kind of stretchy materials that you get. And with this method, it's slightly different. So here I need to put a piece of Teflon onto my mold because the material can stick to the metal, which we don't want. So I lay that out onto the mold and I measure out half of the amount that I need and do one batch first. So I put that plastic into the mold and melt it in the sheet press for about 5 minutes. I then take that plastic out and mix in my base colour material, which comes from plastic bags. And then I pop that piece of material to one side. I then put in the other half into the sheet press in the same way and mix a whole load more different colours into that one whilst it's still hot. I then take both of those and put them back into the press and melt them together. I remove them from the press again and mix them up by hand and then pop them in the press one final time for 10 minutes. I then leave that to cool down and press the sheet out when I've finished.
So that gives you a sense of the two different methods that I've been developing and working with. And I've then made a new series of works. So my Ocean Rise series is taking this plastic recycling process one step further. Not only am I saving the waste material that otherwise would be destined for the ocean, I'm also creating a new series of works that visualize the rising sea levels due to global warming. And I really want to do that by highlighting the interconnectivity of these different systems. So in this series, I'm using I've kind of created these sculptures that make reference to monolithic sculptures, like really, really large sculptures. But I want to kind of reimagine art. Does it need to be so large? Could it be more reserved? Could we be more sustainable? Could we be more reserved with the resources that we use to make our sculptures? So this is a kind of idea with some of these pieces. I've also been looking at, so with the forms of these sculptures, I found out through NASA's website that the global sea levels have risen by 10 centimeters in the last 30 years. And I thought that was actually loads. 10 centimeters to me is actually quite a lot. You know, it's this much. So the artworks themselves are actually all divisible by 10 centimeters. The smaller panel is 10 by 10 centimeters. The middle panel 20 by 10 and the larger panel 30 by 10, just so that you can see that physically in the real world, what that actually means, what that looks like. And so this is me kind of starting to think about those ideas and how I might show data through form, and in the next piece through light as well. And I've created these using the sheets that I've been making, trying to highlight the connectivity between the ocean, the climate and the climate change. And here I've been lighting these artworks with kind of moving lights to highlight how it's also connected to the sunrise and sunset and kind of the cycles of life as well, how we're all connected. And I've also created this new artwork here. So this piece visualizes the global rise in sea levels by displaying the last 15 years from NASA's website, which is the graph of how the ocean levels are rising, basically. So that sort of line that looks almost like a river is actually exactly the graph that you get from NASA's website about that. And I wanted to use light because I wanted to kind of add in this ebb and flow of water and tides and try and create a kind of meditative effect for the viewer. And the work is using this marbling technique that I've developed with the low density polyethylene, and it almost looks like water. So it has that depth and quality to it that I think is really nice to work with. I've also been creating workshop content, so I'm not able to take my massive press out around the country to do workshops. So I've been creating different content with a t-shirt press. So I bought one of those for £100, and then I've got some smaller molds and things like that that I can use. And I'm going to be doing some projects with some different partners. So I'm going to be running some workshops with SPACER and also with East Kent MenCap, working with artists with learning difficulties. And I'll just share with you another video that explains some of those techniques as well. I'm really excited to share with you that we'll be using that technique. I think Anwar's here on the call as well, in some plastic recycling workshops with young people in Milton Keynes. And so we're going to be doing recycling some plastic waste and turning it into geometric shapes that we'll then use in to create an interactive light sculpture. So that's going to be exhibited in September next year, and will be the first time I've created a kind of collaborative artwork with this sustainable practice. So I'm really excited about that. And yeah, that's going to be great. I'm really excited. It's lovely to see you here, Anwar, as well. So I'm just going to whiz through my final slides because I know that I want to give a chance for you to be able to, oh, thank you, yeah, thumbs up. I want to give you guys a chance to ask me questions as well. So I'm just going to whiz through. But just to say that alongside my art practice, I'm also director and curator at Art in Flux with my wonderful colleagues, Maria Almina and Olive Gingrich. So if you haven't heard of us, we're a community interest company that champions artists that work with technology. And we do a lot of public facing talks, events and exhibitions, etc. So with Art in Flux and for this project, to launch this project, I created Radical Ecology, which was in collaboration with the National Gallery. And here I basically invited 3 other artists, Francis Disley, Sarah Krask and Ben Aiton, to come to take part in an online event where we discussed their work in relationship to the environment and the climate crisis as well. And it was really fantastic, well-attended event, and you can see those, you can see a recording of that event on the Art in Flux website. Maybe Al might be able to pull that out. I didn't actually add that to the script, so we'll make sure you've got a link for that if you're interested. It's a really nice thing to look at. And also as part of this event, I've been doing peer events. So I've held 2 lectures for MA Art and Science students at Central St Martin's and computational art students at Goldsmiths, and also curated and hosted a social, Flux Social, for artists working with technology. And it's been really great to sort of share some